Welcome to Shatter.
Help me reach 5,000 subscribers. Support the video with a like and leave your thoughts in the comments. She said it so easily. Like spitting out gum she was tired of chewing. You'll never find better. I didn't even blink. My voice came out calm, flat, almost bored. I already did. She's waiting in the car. The words hung between us like the silence after a gunshot. Her smile froze. It was supposed to be another one of her rehearsed lines. The kind that used to make me explain myself, defend myself, crawl back. Not this time. Not anymore. We were standing in the parking lot outside Olive Garden, of all places. Her friends were still inside, laughing, pretending not to watch. The smell of garlic bread and cheap wine filled the air. Her iPhone buzzed on the table behind the window, notifications lighting up one after another. I knew what kind of messages they were. I'd already seen them. Screenshots, voice notes, private dinners that weren't so private, all while she swore she was working late. Her name is Emily, or maybe I should say was. For 2 years, I believed she was the best thing that had ever happened to me. But tonight, I realized she was just the last version of myself who tolerated lies. She called me boring, said I was too stable, too predictable. And yeah, maybe I was. I used to drive her to work every morning in my Ford F-150, pick up her Starbucks on the way, listen to her talk about how she deserved more. I thought that's what love sounded like, someone telling you you're not enough and you believing you can be. But that night, when I said those words, she's waiting in the car, I didn't mean another woman. Not really. What I meant was me. The version of me she killed slowly, one insult at a time, one comparison at a time. He was waiting in the car, and I was going to meet him again. Her face changed. Not fear, not anger. Just confusion, like she was trying to figure out who had just spoken to her, because it sure wasn't the man she thought she owned. I turned and walked away, keys in hand. She called my name once, quietly, like she didn't want anyone to hear her losing control. Inside the car, the city lights reflected off the windshield. I caught my own reflection for the first time in months, calm, expressionless, unrecognizable. Behind me, I could still see her through the restaurant glass, standing perfectly still. Her friends were whispering. One of them looked at me, then at her, and shook her head slowly. I didn't wait to see what happened next. The engine started, smooth and silent. For the first time, the road ahead didn't feel like escape. It felt like arrival. And when I checked the mirror before pulling out, I realized something strange. She was still standing there, but she couldn't meet her own eyes in the reflection. The next morning, her messages started coming in waves. First the short ones. We need to talk. Then the longer ones, the ones that sound like apologies but aren't. I just think we both overreacted, she wrote. You know I didn't mean it like that. I didn't reply. I didn't even open them. Instead, I drove. Miles of highway blurred past while the city shrank in the rearview mirror. The truck felt heavier that morning, not from luggage, just from silence. The kind that fills every corner when you finally stop defending yourself. By the time I stopped at a small diner off the interstate, the sun had barely climbed over the trees. I ordered black coffee and stared through the window while the waitress wiped down empty tables. My phone vibrated again. 10 missed calls. Then 15. Then none. I didn't block her. I wanted her to hear the silence. It's louder than anything I could ever say. Back home, she'd probably already started rewriting the story. That's what she was good at. She'd tell her friends that I was being dramatic, that I couldn't handle her honesty. Maybe she'd even say she was the one who ended things. But I knew the truth. She'd just lost her audience. It wasn't until later that I realized one of the messages wasn't from her. It was from Ryan, a mutual friend, the kind who always seemed to know too much. His text was simple. You were right about her. Then a photo. Her car. Same parking lot. Different night. She wasn't alone. I stared at the picture for a long time, not angry, not even surprised. It just confirmed what I already felt in my gut. She'd been gone long before I left. I just hadn't noticed the exit signs. That evening, I parked the truck by the lake behind my old apartment. The water was still, like a sheet of glass. I thought about how she used to call me predictable, how she said I never surprised her. Funny thing, people get bored with peace because they mistake it for weakness. I sipped from a Starbucks cup I'd picked up earlier and watched the reflection of the sky turning gold. Somewhere out there, she was realizing the same thing I did. Control only works when the other person still cares. And I didn't. Not anymore. I deleted every photo of us from my phone, one by one, and left just one, the last picture we took before everything cracked. Her smile was bright, perfect, practiced. But now, when I looked closer, I saw it. That tiny shadow behind her eyes. The same one I'd missed for years. It wasn't love. It was calculation. And I finally stopped mistaking the two. I didn't plan to disappear. It just happened. One morning, I woke up and realized I didn't owe anyone an explanation. Not her, not our friends, not even myself. I turned off my phone, packed a few things, and left the city without telling a soul. I drove until the signs stopped looking familiar. The noise in my head quieted down somewhere between the empty gas stations and the flat, open roads. There was a kind of peace and anonymity. No messages, no pity, just space. Days passed like that. I started writing again, something I hadn't done in years. I'd sit in small diners, eat cheap breakfasts, and fill notebooks with thoughts I'd buried long ago. Sometimes I'd catch a look from a waitress or a stranger, a kind of quiet recognition. They didn't know my story, but they could see I was rebuilding something invisible. Meanwhile, she was unraveling. I didn't know it at first, but Ryan eventually reached out again. His message was short. She's asking around about you. Looked scared. I could almost see it. Her pretending not to care while calling everyone we knew. She'd always been terrified of silence. It was the one thing she couldn't manipulate. I didn't answer him either. I just watched the sun go down over a parking lot behind a Walmart and thought about how strange it was to feel free and weightless after years of being needed only for convenience. Every night, I checked my reflection in the motel mirror before turning off the lights. I didn't recognize the man staring back. He looked calmer, sharper, like someone who'd learned the difference between love and ownership. But something in me was shifting. It wasn't anger anymore. It was strategy. I started remembering little things she'd told me about her life. Things she never thought I noticed. Her company's fragile contracts. Her boss who didn't know about her side projects. The people she'd quietly stepped on to climb higher. I wasn't planning revenge. I just wanted clarity. The truth had always been her weak spot. A week later, I got an anonymous email. No name, just attachments, spreadsheets, screenshots, expense reports. Her name was all over them. A coworker must have decided to settle a score. I didn't touch the files at first, but I couldn't ignore them either. They weren't just proof of who she really was. They were a mirror, one I finally wasn't afraid to look into. For the first time, I realized I wasn't running away anymore. I was watching. When I finally opened the files, I did it slowly, not out of hesitation, but precision. Every document, every receipt, every email told the same story. She'd been siphoning money from client accounts for months. A small cut here, a fake invoice there. The kind of fraud that only works when everyone trusts you completely. Emily always said trust was her strongest currency. She wasn't wrong. That's why this felt poetic. I spent hours piecing everything together, not to expose her, but to understand her. To see what kind of person I'd really shared my life with. And as I read, I realized something chilling. She didn't cheat out of passion or impulse. She did it out of boredom. She needed chaos to feel alive. That night, I sat in my car outside a small motel just off the highway, scrolling through her digital trail. Her name appeared again and again, tied to transactions that could ruin her career. I didn't send it to anyone. Not yet. I wanted her to sit in her own silence for a while. To wonder if I knew. To feel the same uncertainty she once fed me. 2 days later, she broke the quiet. Ryan called this time, his voice tense. He said she'd been showing up at my old apartment, waiting in the parking lot like a ghost. He said she looked lost. No makeup, no audience. Just a woman standing in her own aftermath. I didn't go back, but I did send her one thing, a photo. Just one line written beneath it. Sometimes the truth doesn't need to be spoken. It just needs to exist. No threats. No accusations. Just wait. After that, she went dark. No calls, no posts. Even her friends stopped mentioning her. But silence spreads fast. By the end of the week, rumors were circling. Someone at her office had started asking questions. Something about irregular payments, missing funds. I didn't need to move a single piece. The truth moved on its own. That evening, I drove to a quiet lake and parked the car. The air was cold, the kind that cuts clean through thought. I sat there, watching the reflection of the headlights on the water, and realized this wasn't revenge. It was balance. I'd finally stopped trying to make her see me. Now, she couldn't even see herself. And somewhere deep inside, I understood what real distance felt like, not measured in miles, but in indifference. By the end of that week, the first crack appeared. Her company suspended her, pending review. The words sounded polite, but I knew what they meant. Someone had connected the dots. Maybe a coworker. Maybe an auditor. Maybe just karma catching up. I didn't push it. I didn't need to. The world was finally doing what I refused to do for too long. Hold her accountable. I heard from Ryan again. Only this time his message was short and uncertain. He said she'd shown up at his place asking if I'd talked to anyone. She looked nervous, he said. Unsteady. Like someone who'd built her entire image on glass and was now standing barefoot on the shards. He asked if I wanted him to tell her something, to pass along a message. I told him no. Let her wonder. Let her live in the gray space she once kept me in. Meanwhile, I went back to my old gym, the one I hadn't set foot in for over a year. The smell of metal and sweat felt almost cleansing. I kept my headphones in, ignored everyone, and just focused on the movement. Repetition. Focus. Control. It's strange how discipline replaces heartbreak when you finally stop feeding the noise. One night, after a long session, I walked into a quiet bar nearby. A small place, dim lights, old rock music, no drama. I ordered a drink and noticed a woman sitting alone at the counter. She wasn't trying to be seen. She was just there, calm, unreadable. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel the urge to impress anyone. We exchanged a polite nod, nothing more. Later, when I got back to the car, I saw her name light up my phone again. Emily. She'd sent a single message. Are you proud of this? No question mark, just those words. I didn't answer. Pride wasn't part of it. This wasn't victory, it was release. That night, as I sat in the car outside my apartment, I scrolled through old photos again. Her laughter, her parties, her endless poses for social media. All of it looked artificial now, like watching someone rehearse a life that never fit. And as I stared at her face on the screen, I realized something that hit harder than any betrayal. She wasn't just losing her job or her reputation. She was losing the one thing she couldn't live without: control over the story. For the first time, she wasn't the narrator. She was the silence between my sentences. A month passed before I heard her voice again. Not in person, through a voicemail I didn't expect. Her tone was soft, uncertain, nothing like the woman who once told me I was convenient. She said she just wanted to talk, that she didn't understand how everything fell apart so fast. Then she paused, like she was fighting for air, and said, I miss you. I listened to it twice, not out of nostalgia, but analysis. The way she said it wasn't about missing me. It was about missing what I used to give her: certainty, structure, someone to control. And now that everything around her was slipping, she was trying to grab onto the only thing that ever stayed steady. I didn't call back. I went for a run instead. The air was cold, sharp enough to burn my lungs. Every step felt like shedding another piece of the man I used to be. The one who waited for her texts, who explained himself after every argument, who believed silence was punishment. That night, I stopped by a Target to grab a few things. Nothing special, just the normal noise of life. Groceries, coffee pods, a new notebook. It felt good to be invisible, to blend in. No one knew me here. No one expected anything. As I walked through the aisles, I caught a glimpse of a couple arguing near the electronics section. The woman was holding her phone up, demanding answers. The man just stood there, frozen, defensive. I didn't stay to watch. I already knew how that story ended. I'd lived it. Back home, I poured myself a drink and finally opened her message thread again. There were new texts now, frantic ones. Apologies, accusations, and silence. The pattern I'd memorized long ago. Ryan had mentioned she'd been seen with the guy from those parking lot photos, her friend. Apparently, that didn't last long. Word was, he disappeared the moment the rumors about her job started spreading. People like him always do. I thought about sending one final message. Something clean, definitive, maybe even kind. But I stopped. She didn't need closure. She needed consequence. And life was already giving her that. Instead, I stepped out onto the balcony, looked at the empty street below, and realized something simple. She used to define my world. Now she was just background noise. For the first time in a long while, the quiet didn't feel heavy. It felt earned. Weeks went by, and I started to notice how absence changes people. Not the kind you announce, but the kind that leaves a shadow everywhere you used to be. She must have felt it too, because the silence between us began to echo. I could sense it in the way Ryan stopped mentioning her name, in the way her social media went dark. The woman who once lived for attention was now invisible. One evening, he finally told me the truth. She'd lost her job. Officially, it was for ethical violations, but everyone knew what that meant. The story had spread fast, especially in the small circle she used to treat like her personal stage. Her friends distanced themselves, one by one. Even the ones who used to cheer her on stopped answering her calls. He said she looked different now. Tired. Thinner. Like someone who hadn't slept in days. I listened quietly, not out of pity, but observation. I could picture it perfectly. Her standing in front of a mirror, makeup half done, trying to recognize the person staring back. That night, I took the truck out to the coast. The air smelled like salt and rain, the kind of quiet you can't fake. I parked near the edge of the pier and watched the tide crash against the rocks. I thought about how strange it was, how peace feels heavier than pain when you've never known it before. I didn't hate her anymore. Hate requires energy, and she'd already taken too much of that. What I felt now was distance, the kind that can't be crossed by texts or tears. A few days later, she sent another message. It was short, almost fragile. I don't know who I am without you. I read it once, then locked my phone and set it face down on the counter. That sentence used to be my weakness. Now it just sounded like truth, one that came too late. I made coffee, turned on some old music, and looked around my apartment. It felt lighter somehow. No reminders, no tension, just the quiet rhythm of my own life returning. I realized something as the morning light hit the window. She wasn't my story anymore. She was the lesson between the chapters. And somewhere out there, I knew she was still searching for her reflection in every screen, every silence, every shadow. But no mirror could help her now. She'd have to face what she'd become without someone to blame. It was a Sunday morning when she showed up. I didn't hear her knock at first, just the echo of it between the walls. I opened the door, and there she was, standing in the hallway like a ghost who'd lost her script. Her hair was tied back, no makeup, dark circles under her eyes. The same woman who used to dress for attention now looked like she wanted to disappear. She said my name quietly, like she was afraid it might break. I didn't answer. I just stepped aside and let her in. The air between us was thick, not with anger, but with everything left unsaid. She looked around the apartment like it was the first time she'd ever seen it. The furniture was simple now. No clutter, no trace of her influence. Just clean lines and space. She noticed the open notebook on the table, the one I'd been writing in. I could see the question forming in her eyes, but I didn't explain. She finally spoke. I lost everything, she said. My job. My friends. I didn't think it would end like this. I didn't respond. I just watched her. The silence made her nervous, so she kept talking, trying to fill the void. She said she'd made mistakes, that she was sorry, that she just wanted a chance to start over. The words sounded rehearsed, like she'd been practicing them in her head for weeks. But there was one thing different. She wasn't trying to control the moment. She was unraveling. And for the first time, I could see the real her, stripped of all the layers she used to hide behind. I walked to the kitchen, poured 2 glasses of water, and set one on the table in front of her. She looked at it, but didn't touch it. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm. You didn't lose everything, I said. You just met yourself. She looked up, and for a second, her expression changed. Not anger, not guilt, but realization. Like she finally understood what I meant the night I said she'd never find better. It wasn't about someone else. It was about becoming someone else. I didn't tell her to leave. I didn't ask her to stay. I just let the silence settle between us. That new kind of silence that doesn't hurt anymore. And as she sat there, staring at her reflection in the window, I knew she saw what I'd seen months ago. She couldn't meet her own eyes. She stayed seated for a long time, eyes fixed on the window as if she could disappear into the reflection. The city outside was quiet, washed in the pale light of early morning. I could see her fighting with herself, trying to find a version of the story where she wasn't the villain. But the truth doesn't bend once it's out in the open. It just waits. She started talking again, her voice low and uneven. She said she didn't know how to rebuild, that everything she touched seemed to fall apart. She mentioned her family, how they'd stopped answering her calls, how her mother told her she needed to figure herself out before coming home. It wasn't pity in her tone, it was panic. She was finally realizing what losing everything really meant. I listened, not because I needed closure, but because I wanted to understand the woman who once held all the power. And now, sitting across from me, she looked small, almost childlike, stripped of the sharp confidence that used to cut through every conversation. The silence stretched between us. She asked if I hated her. I said nothing. Hate was too easy. Indifference was harder and more honest. I thought back to the version of her I used to love. The quick smile, the ambitious plans, the way she'd light up a room just by walking in. But that wasn't her. That was a performance I'd applauded for too long. The real woman was sitting in front of me now, raw, fragile, and terrified of her own reflection. Eventually, she stood up. I could tell she wanted me to stop her, to say something that would pull her back into the safety of the past. But I didn't move. She took a slow breath, nodded to herself, and walked toward the door. Before leaving, she turned around. "You were right," she said quietly. "You already found better." The words hung in the air. Not bitter, not sarcastic, just true. I watched her walk down the hallway, her steps unsteady but real. For the first time, she wasn't performing. She was just a person facing the aftermath of her choices. When the door closed behind her, the apartment felt lighter. I didn't feel victorious. I just felt done. Outside, the reflection on the glass shifted with the morning sun, and for a moment, I thought about how strange it was. Sometimes the only way to heal is to let the other person break. After she left, the apartment stayed silent for hours. No echoes, no messages, no trace of her voice hanging in the air. I sat by the window and watched the light move across the floor, thinking about how quiet freedom really sounds. It doesn't roar. It doesn't celebrate. It just breathes. For days, I didn't hear from her again. Not a call, not a text. The space between us had finally settled into something permanent. But then, a week later, a small envelope arrived in the mail. No return address, just my name written in her handwriting. The same looping letters I once knew by heart. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No apology, no explanation. Just one line, "I understand now." I read it once and set it down. It wasn't forgiveness she was asking for. It was acknowledgement. A sign that she finally saw what I'd been trying to show her all along. That love isn't ownership and silence isn't weakness. That evening, I drove out to the edge of the city, the same lake where I'd sat months before when everything began to fall apart. The water was calm this time, the surface flat and still. I leaned against the hood of the car and watched the reflection of the sky turning from gold to black. I thought about her words, about all the chaos and noise that had once filled our lives. And then, somewhere between the sound of the wind and the hum of the highway in the distance, I realized the story wasn't about her anymore. It was about what her absence created, the version of myself I'd forgotten existed. For the first time in years, I wasn't reacting. I wasn't chasing. I wasn't trying to prove anything. I was just there, fully present, quietly alive. Later, as I drove back into the city, I passed the old Olive Garden, the same place where it all began. The parking lot was half empty, the lights buzzing softly under the night sky. I slowed down for a second, not out of nostalgia, but closure. That was the last place I ever explained myself. The last time I let someone define my worth. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I caught my reflection in the car window, calm, steady, unrecognizable in the best way. Maybe she'll find peace someday. Maybe not. But that's no longer my story to tell. Because the man who once sat across from her that night, he's gone. And I'm not going back. Support the channel by liking, commenting, and subscribing. I promise even more interesting stories.